Welcome to part 2 on the podcast series regarding is licensure a realistic option for personal trainers? My name is Tyler Valencia and I am the president and owner of KIPS. In this episode, we have two guests that have been at the forefront of licensure and registry. That is Graham Melstrand and Francis Neric. Now, in part 2 of this podcast episode, the option of registry comes up, and is that a better solution for personal trainers? Now, what is that? What does that entail? In the US right now, there is an organization by the name of USREPS where they are gathering information from certifying agencies so that once and if this is a realistic option, consumers can go online, look up the name and credentials of a certified personal trainer and see if they are valid. Now, a reason why personal trainers might want to get behind this idea is in the hiring process. If you are looking to get hired at a gym these days, you will go online or you will take an application. You will see what the hiring requirements are for that facility. They will most likely have credentials that they accept. If a registry of certified personal trainers was in place, these hiring managers could go to an organization like USREPS, type in the name of a professional and see that they are a current certified personal trainer. So that would be a big benefit for those looking to be hired. On the flip side, a consumer looking to validate the credentials of a personal trainer could go to this organization as well and see that their credentials are valid as well. What I really like about this episode is the honesty spoken by the two gentlemen in this episode, Graham and Francis. As a Fit Pro and as somebody that's worked on the fitness education side of the industry for the last 15 years, the ability to hear two people that are at the forefront being honest, being transparent on how registry might be a better option than licensure is really important. When I first started working for Nesta, this idea of licensure registry was just getting going. The momentum was just getting rolling. And to hear later on that registry could be a better option for gyms and for consumers, I think that is really something to take home and a big takeaway for those listening. Let's now get to part 2 of this episode. Part 1 will be linked in the description, which I would highly recommend listening to get a better picture of what these gentlemen are talking about when it comes to is licensure a valid option for personal trainers. If you are an existing Fit Pro already training clients, please drop a comment and let us know what you think if this is a valid idea. Something that popped up in my head early on that I'm sure listeners are wondering, theoretically, let's say that steps are starting to take place to get licensure in effect. How does that impact the steps of somebody becoming a personal trainer? What does that theoretically look like? Graham, do you want to start us off?
Sure, on that. And, what I'd probably like to open on this is just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And that's that there's a substantial movement that's coming from both ends of the political spectrum to reduce the burden of government regulation of occupations on that and do it at the possible level. And they have different reasons for it. On the Republican side, they want to address the needs and concerns of military families that move frequently because the state-to-state requirements for many occupations are highly variable in terms of licensed occupations. But they also want to reduce the burden for employers, practitioners, and consumers from a cost standpoint. And on the other end of the spectrum, they're looking to make it easier to get on the career ladder to where you go and advance your career by taking away any barriers that don't materially impact the safety of consumers or the quality of services that are delivered. So from an entry standpoint, real estate would be an example of an occupation that's highly variable. In California, a bachelor's degree is required, where in Arizona, you can go to a trade school and you can complete the required training in as quick as 10 days. Now, those would be 10 very, very long days. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can. The role delineation studies really drive those minimum entry requirements. And say for personal training, that's 18 CPR, eligible to work. And then of course you still have to have a certain mastery of the content and the application of the content to be successful. Where master's is the accepted point of entry for the clinical exercise physiologist, for instance. But those would be set by states because licensure models have to be self-sustaining from a financial standpoint. You don't generally in any newer occupations that are coming into regulation over maybe the last 20 or 30 years, states creating their own exams. What they're doing is they're using a criteria where they've got an established educational requirement that's aligned with that for the certification. And then they're using that national certifications from an accredited program. Again, dietetics, occupational therapy, athletic training, crane operators. If you want to get outside the box of our space, Francis, I'm sure you can think of a half a dozen other occupations that are similarly situated.
I think there's the part about the license perspective. I think a lot of folks are like, if I'm licensed, I got to get paid more. And that's the reality. It's not. I mean, it's complicated. And the thing is though, too, it's just like, even if you're licensed and you get it, and I want to kind of underscore kind of what Graham was saying. It's just like, it's the both Republicans and Democrats are anti-licensing. And I think a lot of it's in the example, like what Graham was saying, is in the backdrop of military and military spouses. Military, if you're taking civilian sector certifications, I think is one, or licenses. And the second one is for their spouses. They're moving every 2 to 3 years. And every time you go from state to state, there's no reciprocity in the current state of going between states. For the most part, there are multi-state compacts, but when you're talking about, a lot of times you have to start over, and it's really expensive and complicated again. So when you're looking at entering the workforce, and I think especially like the post-COVID kind of era, it's just like you wanting to lower the barrier to entry into the profession, but then also at the same time make sure that the public's safe. So when you're looking at it from the perspective, it's just like, we should get licensed because we'll get paid more. We're going to get more respect. It's arguably, it's like maybe, but that there's, for us, I think when you're looking at the highest level certifications, where it's the clinical exercise physiologists, exercise physiologists, strength conditioning coaches, you have to have the universities adopt at a minimum the programmatic accreditation. And that standard doesn't hit till 2030 for NSCA for their strength conditioning coach, and for ACSM 2027, because our respective boards required it. Because they're like, look, your curriculum at your university ties directly to the job role. And that's where, when you're looking at, is there a massive or wide adoption of it? That's also a big. And so I think there's some opportunities there too.
Francis, you raise a really interesting kind of connection to a point on that, is that by design, licensure is intended to exclude some participants from being able to provide a service in a profession. And they also tend to have a protected scope of practice as well, that other occupations are excluded from providing. And a certification process tends to be more inclusive because the defined scope of work can be a little bit more fluid. And so if you look at it like Venn diagrams in terms of the overlapping portions, you'll have that. But the competitive nature of occupations, and you see it when you look at athletic training and physical therapy, one is trying to prevent the growth and expansion of the scope for athletic trainers. And physical therapy is trying to figure out where their opportunities are in terms of self-pay services or services where they're allowed to provide clinical services direct, without referral from a physician. And, so if you look at each stakeholder, a referring professional from the healthcare community wants to know that they're referring to, in our case, an exercise professional that's going to be qualified to provide a safe and effective and enjoyable experience for the patient that they refer from. And so they tend to look at licensure as like, boy, it would be nice if they had it because that's what we have and I understand it. For the practitioners, sometimes they equate the idea of licensure with, as Francis mentioned, increased compensation, respect, and recognition. But the correlation between those isn't isn't as well developed as you'd think on that. And the consumers, they want to know that when they hire somebody, that person is capable of delivering a quality experience.
Oh yeah, I can say from whenever I look at different community pages, just scrolling through anytime somebody's looking for somebody to complete a task around their house, can somebody recommend somebody that's licensed in XYZ? Does somebody have a license recommendation or referral for XYZ or whatever it has to do with they want somebody that's licensed because of that credibility that comes with it. So that's a good point there. I know that somebody...
That's interesting that you say that because I think this part of it, I think is, to me, that's why I think is what we're looking at from the fitness industry is certification. And I'm going to say I'm going to be a little more provocative on it. Is certification has been, the word certification has been completely bastardized, like within the fitness industry. Because when you're looking at it, you can get certified as a breathing instructor. You can be certified, you could probably be certified in underwater basket weaving. It's just like you're a certified
every modality on the face of the earth.
It doesn't mean anything. It's just like, you're like, okay, versus like when you're looking at is when you're saying somebody's licensed or they're a registered dietitian, there's an inherent level of trust, right? Because then you're just like, okay, well, what does that mean? Because when you're saying a nurse, it's like, oh, well, where did they go to school? You're not thinking about that. You're thinking, oh, they're a registered nurse. I got it. They're a registered dietitian. I got it. Like they are somebody that I can trust, right? So when you're looking at the level of trust, I think you have to understand, well, where do those components mean? And I think what we're trying to say certified, then you're like, oh, I have a bajillion acronyms after my name. And you're just like, does that mean anything? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the actual advocacy component of like when we're looking at fighting for our respective professionals at the USREPS, I think you have to look at registered as being that demarcation of like, okay, they're a registered professional. How do you develop that level of trust between that and with licensed professionals? And the reality of it is it's really, really hard because if you look at, oh gosh, how many accredited personal trainer programs out there, Graham? I think it's like 20 or so programs.
Not quite at this point. With merger and acquisition, it's a little bit less. But yes, there are a significant number of
right. Because you look at ACSM, NSC. You just look at organizations, ACSM, NSC, and NASM. You just like it becomes like if you're looking at from across, there's lots of them, and then within it, there's a lot of different acronyms in between. So if I'm going to a physician and I go to a physical therapist or a dietitian, you're going to have to explain all of it. And then you throw in NCCA, ISO 17024, and I go, okay, are they programmatically accredited? It becomes very confusing. I think one of the things when you're looking at that referral part that Graham was describing, how do you cut through the noise? I think registration is one. And then the second one is it's going to be programs over people. Now, when you're talking about the national level, like the Physical Activity Alliance, where you have lots of organizations that are in there, I mean, do yourself a favor, go to Move With Us. I think it's movewithus.org.
PAA movewithus.org.
Perfect. PAA movewithus.org. And look who's involved there. The question is, and it's always been, how do if I'm a physician or I'm a licensed professional, how do I effectively refer to somebody? And if you're looking at this, the sea of acronyms, you're going to go, I don't know, forget it, go to a home-based program. However, if you're going to a program, and this is like, I think, Graham, you brought this up, gosh, at the ACSM, we did a survey, and this is before my time here. The 3 questions that they asked to a physician, to our physician groups here at ACSM, how much do you trust a degreed certified professional? It was about 50-50. Like, maybe a little bit, right? I think so, but I'm not sure. And then they go, what about a facility? A facility that hires degreed certified people. And it was about 50-50, right? The third one was, what about a program that has key performance indicators to show improvements in health outcomes? And it was about 90%. So if you're looking at the example of it, it's just going, oh, if my patient has a heart attack they go through a surgeon, they have that, they go through a physical therapist, they do this some sort of kind of work there. I'm going to send them to a cardiac rehab program, right? The program in itself they have to tie to very specific KPIs to show patient success. And the same thing, my patient has COPD, right? COPD programs are like, oh, it's done at the hospital-based system. It's physician oversight and multidisciplinary care. And the same way, if you look at on the other side with athletes, if you're sending your athlete into a return to play, send them the strength conditioning program. I don't have to know all the acronyms. So I think when you're looking at the perspective of advocacy, it's just like the referral part. You're going to see registration as one, you're going to have the effective programs over one. Who hire registered professionals is number two.
And Francis, I think one of the things that's helpful maybe for, Tyler and his audience on that is some definitions that, are easy to draw and the multitude of credentials and credentials for everything in the space that are called certification has undermined some of that trust on that. But if you look at your education as your computer hardware, right, that's your laptop. Your operating system is your certification for a job role, group exercise instructor, personal trainer, strength coach, clinical exercise physiologist. You could probably add Pilates teacher or yoga teacher for that. Those are job roles that are recognized by the U.S. Department of Labor and their peers internationally. And then all of those other things that are modality level, those are your apps. That's how you deliver your customer experience and those programs. Do you have education and training in them? You do. Francis mentioned the name or mentioned nursing as a professional. You were an RN and you've pursued additional education and training to be able to support a specific population or tool or procedure. And that's the direction that we need to move in this. And, rather than having the 20 letters after your name, really what you want to develop is that area of specialization. I'm a strength and conditioning coach that works with collegiate athletes in the Olympic sports of track and field and triathlon. Where you're at to that level, because then the consumer knows what's in it for them as well and how to identify that person that's going to be the best fit.
We've talked about licensure as a benefit for consumers, for employers. What would be the pitch now for the established personal trainer? What would be the pitch to them to get behind it, that this would be a benefit for them? I think that might be something that's popping up right now. Francis, do you want to start us off with that?
I don't know if I would pitch licensure, frankly, for personal trainers. I think it's just like, to me, it's just like, is the juice worth the squeeze? I don't know if it is. To me, it's just like, because it's generally safe occupation.
Yeah,
I don't know if licensure would be the right space. Now, when you're talking about it from the perspective of, can you get to a level where it's a way to get towards recognition of the profession? I think a better version of that would be registration. Now, because one, I think it's one is when you look at the registration component, you look at kind of levels of the occupations, like, right? So on the very lowest level, you're going to be talking on the job training, right? So if I work at Starbucks or wherever, you train them on the job, you do enough that's there. Then you have general education when you're talking about going, I went to university, I got an exercise science degree. There's something like that where I went to got my associate's degree. There I learned a little bit more. Certification, it has an additional level of rigor, because if you look at just purely education, it's just like, I can learn whatever I want. The certification, a level above that, is just like, independent of where you went to school, I can do a job. Registration goes, okay, from the registration perspective, it's I'm certified and I could find them somewhere. And then one level higher than that is licensure. So registration is similar and very similar to licensure, but then also it does cut through the red tape of going, like, getting into the job, into job roles. So licensure, I'd probably say I don't think that's the right avenue. Registration is. I think there are other organizations that are accredited that should join the U.S. Register to get their individuals on there.
I like the honest answer.
Francis, I would actually add just a little bit to what you said. I agree with everything that you're saying, but there's a set of steps and processes that are in place, and I think that one of them is that you alluded to is that in some of the most critical ones are that we have to have the support and buy-in from the employers to hire only those individuals that have current credentials from accredited programs. That should be the floor that you're putting people on your personal training or your fitness floor on that. And we were making great progress pre-pandemic on that. The top 100 organizations that club industry had identified all had that as part of their job descriptions for group exercise and personal training. But post-pandemic, because of the losses in practitioners associated with facilities being closed or people moving to an independent, they've been waffling on that commitment. For the practitioner, for the exercise professional themselves, earning and maintaining that credential and honoring the continuing education requirements, and then learning how to become an advocate for themselves, the profession, the industry are precursors to what you're talking about. But you mentioned turnover, and we really didn't get too far into that yet. It came by in passing, but the challenge that you have right now is about 65 to 70% of people that sit for certification pass that exam. But then in that first certification cycle, you may only have 55% of them recertify. And most of those individuals have left the field or their employers are not tracking that. But I believe that's a problem that goes really back to the preparation and the onboarding of employees because of the business model that's in place, which is a zero-based budget. You don't produce any revenue as a trainer. You don't have any expense. It takes away the incentive for professionals and department managers to really invest in the onboarding of those individuals to give them the best opportunity to be successful and to get enough sand under the wheels so that they can stay in space. Those are the types of things that are critical at the early part of an individual's career. If you make it past 4 years, you're probably going to go a long ways. But the other thing that's really important for professionals to understand is how to transition from getting paid for your time to paid for your expertise. Because you can't make more time.
I agree with Graham, and I think that's the part when you're talking about success. I think, and frankly, this is why I think I've gone around the U.S. a ton and talking to a bunch of students in universities, at faculty, et cetera. And I always go back to Cal State Long Beach, and Cal State Long Beach being the example of a solid program. And what I mean by that, even before they were accredited, you had to do a number of internships. You had to do it, and what you want to do. And frankly, that's like when you're talking about from the turnover rate that we see. And when I talked to Sherry McMillan at Northwest Personal Training, the turnover in first-time personal trainers is around 80% within 6 months. So when you're looking at employers and understanding that those people are entering and exiting the field as quickly as they're coming in, I think there's a little bit of fear there from an employer's perspective, like, do I have enough in the hopper to make sure I have enough employees? Programs like Cal State Long Beach, if you are becoming a personal trainer your sophomore year, sophomore year, and then you're applying that into practice all the way by the time you graduate, you're going to have 4 years of experience. You're most likely going to be successful. And you're going to figure out whether you like it. You're going to figure out those networks, and you're going to be successful. Like, that's the part where the biggest problem that I see is people jumping into it without having any sort of experience. And the experience is king or queen of the profession. You have to have that experience. And if you don't implement that, you're SOL. You are going to be at a tremendous disadvantage, because to come in and go, oh, well, we're licensed, we're going to get paid more. It's like, no. If you would have been a personal trainer year one out of high school, you're in your freshman year at Cal State Long Beach, and you did that all the way through, by the time you graduate, you're probably going into a management role, and you're going to be fine. You're going to be able to define those programs.
And Francis, even if you didn't do that coming out of high school, if you went into the institution, you completed your core science and applied theory classes, you sit for certification, you get 2 years work in campus recreation where you're not only training individuals, but you're running programs, then you're really ready to hit the road running.
Oh yeah.
But that onboarding piece is absolute most critical element. And if you'll allow me my soapbox, I think, every employer is looking for the unicorn. They want somebody that's got those great interpersonal skills and that can sell effectively. But the idea of selling, new members and new personal trainers aren't that different in that there's a high failure rate early. New members should be working with your most tenured, experienced trainers to onboard your members. And the sales function around training, as Francis mentioned, it should be programs sold ideally through the business side and then fulfilled by the qualified practitioner that are doing what they do the best, in the area that they're personally and professionally passionate about.
Yeah, I have mentioned in just passing to a couple colleagues that I believe Cal State Long Beach is a fitness professional university. If I was just to jog my memory of people that I graduated, individuals on this Zoom call as well, and individuals that I've met in the field, I'm just very impressed just to hear how many went to Long Beach State University. And I think that what's built up, all the things that Francis mentioned with the internship hour, the experience, the hands-on experience that you're getting, and then you're graduating with a degree, and most likely you're working as a personal trainer in the field, you are set up for success. Couple that with an onboarding program where you're learning how to do sales, personal training sales, the interpersonal skills, all those things can really set you up for success. And I think both of you hit on great things that are impacting the longevity of new personal trainers. And honestly, the unknown of how do I be successful in this field often is coming in with no clue and a false perspective of what this job entails. So I will admit that we actually didn't get to the majority of the outline that I'd planned for this call, but it was really a great episode, an educational episode for the listeners out there. Before we sign off here, can you both provide information on the organizations that you work for and also how to reach out if maybe any questions were to arise? Francis?
Yeah, sure. I would go to acsm.org. That's our website. Look at these two places. One is certification. I think clearly you can find out certifications we offer, the resources we provide. Also in the about, look the advocacy, look what we're fighting for. I think that's the big thing is for us, not only science to practice, but like how are we advocating for you as professionals? I think that's the key things. What are we doing there? This third one, I would tell you, go to USREPS.org, find yourself on the register as soon as possible and start pushing registration as the minimum standard for the profession. I think that's going to be a big key thing that's there. The last one, and I would probably say is probably the Physical Activity Alliance, but I'll let Graham kind of talk about that.
Sure. And as Francis mentioned earlier, that's PAAmovewithus.org. That's the leading advocacy organization for physical activity. And it includes a broad cross-section of sector representation on that. And they're the ones that are actually trying to bring physical activity, or are bringing, I should say, physical activity in as a standard of care with respect to assessment, prescription, and referral. And that's happening. It's going to be in all of the EMRs and there's pilot activities that are happening around that now. 2027 is when it's going to be required. And for me, organization is Active Sport Advisory. No E on the active sport together, advisory.com.
Great.
My email's L.
And I will provide information in the description of this episode, whether you are watching on YouTube, listening on Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on the KIPS Podcast and providing your insight.
Thank you.
Love to come back and talk about the other things that you didn't get to today.
I'll follow up there, Tyler.